If you don't know me, my name is Zachary Elwood, and I spend a good amount of my time talking about the problem of us versus them polarization in America. I have a psychology and behavior focused podcast called People Who Read People, which is about understanding people better. You can learn more about it at behavior podcast.com. A good number of my episodes for that podcast have been devoted to the problem of polarization and aimed at reaching a better understanding of our divides and the emotions behind them, and making the case for why we should see us versus them polarization as a huge problem, even as the biggest problem. I'm also currently working on a book about healing American divides, which has the working title Diffusing American Anger. When talking about the problem of polarization, the number one objection I hear from people on the left and the right is basically, but the other side is so horrible. We need to be polarized. Another form of this objection is, but we're passionate in our beliefs, and how dare you try to tell us to not be passionate about our political beliefs. And these are misunderstandings about what the goals of depolarization are. Because you can believe anything you want and work towards any political goal you want while seeing polarization as a huge problem and while taking depolarizing conflict resolution approaches. To put this another way, the goal of depolarization work and conflict resolution work is not changing people's beliefs, but about getting more people to examine the role that insults and other expressions of anger and hatred have on us. It's about examining the emotional polarization, which is what I often call us versus them polarization, and not about our political beliefs. It's about getting more people to think about how their group's divisive, angry language contributes to our divides and creates more anger. And one can do this even while thinking the other side is much, much worse. And if you're thinking, but my side doesn't contribute that much, I'd ask you to be willing to look into that if you're genuinely curious about it. Because there are both progressive people and conservative people who have written entire books and many articles about the contributions to our divides that they see from people in their own group. The work is out there for people who really want to understand the mechanisms for how our anger grows over time. Aside from conflict resolution goals, it's possible to believe that such approaches are also simply the best way to accomplish your political goals. Because it's possible to see how expressions of anger and insults mainly serve to amplify anger and insults on the other side and give more power to the most polarized and angry people on the other side, thereby helping create pushback to one's own stances and helping create the very things that can make us upset. So these can also just be seen as simply persuasive and politically logical approaches to take. And it's not a coincidence that these approaches can be seen as both de escalating and as politically effective. As a way of making the case that we can have a wide range of beliefs and still take de escalating conflict resolution approaches, this video will include talks with two very different people. One is Luka, who is a self described woke person who many people would categorize as pretty far left. On the hot button issues, Luka could be described as staunchly pro trans, pro Ukraine, in favor of abortion rights, anti Trump, and anti fascist. The other person we'll call John. John is a Trump voter who, amongst other things, thinks that Democrat side beliefs are greatly hurting America, and who also thinks the 2020 election might not have been legitimate, as he thought there were quite a few suspicious things that happened in that area. One note about John: at his request, I did not include his real name or his video or his images. And this was because he was afraid that him doing this talk honestly might negatively impact his job, which I think is a legitimate fear. And so I deeply respect him being willing to talk with me about his views. The start of this video is a 10-minute presentation of mine. It's a brief summary of how I view the problem of polarization and what we need to do to fix it. And I did this presentation to both of the people you'll see in this video as a way to define the problem of polarization and kick off the talking about it. I made this video to show how it's possible for people across the political spectrum to agree about the principles of conflict resolution. If you already agree with that point, maybe you don't need to watch this video. But you may enjoy other things in this video, including my thoughts on how we should think about polarization and what we can do about that problem. Or you may just enjoy hearing two very politically different people talk about the nature of our divides from different perspectives. I do hope that if you enjoy this video and find it helpful and educational, you'll consider sharing it with other people, because that's part of the solution to this problem. More people being aware of these perspectives and talking about them. We just need more people talking about the problem, really. Thanks for watching. So yeah, again, this is just going to be like my summary of like the most important points I'm trying to make in my book. Well, not all of them, but you know, the majority of the important ones. Okay, so first, what is the problem that, you know, when people talk about depolarization or polarization, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And I would say the problem is increasing polarization, both ideological and emotional, those two dimensions, making our society more fractured, more dysfunctional, more unstable, just more miserable in general. So that's kind of defining the problem. And then when we get into what's the primary goal of depolarization work, and to me, you know, my take on it, other people might differ a little bit, but to me, how I define it is to significantly reduce the expression of political animosity in our country. And I specifically say the expression because it's like you can be quite passionate and even angry, but the depolarization work is about recognizing how the expression of like us versus them insults and animosity played outward is what affects and amplifies the animosity and the divides. And you know, the more we do that, it's not like there's some like specific goal. It's just that the more we try to do that, the less polarization we'll have is the idea. And an important point there is that, you know, the goal is to try to make a change in our relationship to our anger, not a change in beliefs. And I think that's an important point, because a lot of people, when they hear about the idea of depolarization, they think we're trying to like shift people's beliefs, right? Like their political beliefs, where we're not trying to like shift people's beliefs. We're trying to shift their emotional polarization, their anger, right? And I think that's an important point, because I think that's what a lot of people push back on. They hear depolarization and they're like, oh, they're trying to change our beliefs and make us more moderate or something. And we're hell no, we're not going to do that, right? Which is understandable. So why is the main goal? Why do I say the main goal is reducing expressions of animosity and not something else? And to me, it's because anger is the core driver here. Anger creates more righteous anger, which in turn creates more anger, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really a feedback cycle, and the emotion is really the core player here, and not so much the issues as we tend to think. And this was kind of like a little, you know, graphic I tried to make, showing the nature of, like, you know, we speak about the other side in more insulting and demeaning ways. They see us as more immoral and dangerous. They speak about us in more insulting and demeaning ways. We see them as more immoral and dangerous, and so on and so on. So there's kind of this feedback loop in various ways. And continuing with that point of like, why do I say reducing expressions of animosity is the main goal? One kind of less obvious point, I think, in that is that our anger, our political animosity, our us versus them anger, can even polarize our beliefs and even shift our beliefs to the outside and make them more extreme and non-negotiable. And this is not an obvious thing, because, you know, but studies show, we could point out to one specific one by James Druckmann that showed like people's us versus them anger pre-COVID, before COVID hit, was later, you know, correlated to how extreme they were on either side of the issue. So it was like their us versus them anger was a factor, seemed to be a factor in like how extreme, you know, they were, in like, you know, thinking that COVID was super serious and they had to take all these precautions, or thinking they didn't have to take any precautions at all, basically polarizing their beliefs. And that's just one example, but I think we can see that in other ways, where the more anger we have, we see the other side through this lens,
that makes us more see any specific issue through a more moral lens and makes us less willing to negotiate. Studies also show like the more moral you feel about an issue, the more it has a moral framing, the less willing you are to negotiate, which I think is kind of common sense. Like when we feel people are just bad people, we're like, we know we're not gonna budge on this stance because they're just bad and their stances are morally wrong. Um, so I think the takeaway from this to me is that our us versus them anger helps create the very things we're angry about in a non-obvious way, and that to me is why I try to make that case to politically passionate people who care about who really care about specific policies. For example, somebody who wants to you know, for any issue I can name, really, if you care about that, the more us versus them animosity you put out into the world, you're basically helping the other side. The more extreme people on the other side become stronger, right? You're putting more wind in their sails by with the anger and helping create the very forces that are most angry at you. So, how do we accomplish this goal? Like, let's say we're aligned, people are aligned on these ideas being the goals. How do we accomplish them? I think we do this by convincing many people, as many people as we can, to think that the depolarization work is important and to share the ideas with other words. And this is kind of my joke here, that we want to infect people with the depolarization mind virus that spreads to others, and that's just a silly way to say we want to persuade people that these are good ideas and have them share them with other people. And how do we convince people that these ideas are important? I think we have to induce some emotions in people, the same way you try to make anybody convinced of anything. You have to induce some emotional resonance in them, and so we can show them why polarization, especially as it gets worse and worse, should scare them, like worst case scenarios from other countries where things fall apart and there's a lot of violence and nobody wins, right? It's just a net negative for everybody, no matter what you believe in. And we show them the dynamics of how it works, understanding how our anger and expressions of anger help contribute to the dynamics and the polarization. And we show them that our views of the other side can be very distorted. We show them examples of that, not just of like, there's distortions around like how many people on the other side actually believe extreme things. And then there's also, what are the motivations for those things? And we can have very distorted motivations of like the values that people hold for why they believe those things, like immigration, for example. Liberals viewing conservatives as being racist or bigots just for not wanting high immigration, and that's just a distortion of the motivations that can be present. And then maybe we show people try to get them to see some hope in this, that maybe there's a chance that we can make things better if we all more people decide to work on these things. And then how do we lower people's internal anger, like their own anger? And I'll say here, like, I don't think it's technically necessary to lower people's anger, because you can imagine someone who's quite angry but still wants to work on, still has the view that these ideas are important. And for example, like, I'm often angry about specific things, but I still take the stance that these things are important, and it's important to apply these depolarizing conflict resolution ideas. But I do, from a practical standpoint, it's like, I think in a practical sense, to get people to embrace these ideas, you do have to lower their anger below some threshold, because in practical sense, like if somebody's really angry, they're not really going to want to work on these things. So lowering anger, if you can, is a good idea to get people to embrace these ideas. So we lower anger by trying to correct people's distorted perceptions, as I talked about. The number of opponents with extreme views, correcting those perceptions, because a lot of people have very big misperceptions of those. And then, like I said, the motives, and examining like the well-meaning and rational motives of opponents, and not focusing on like the worst, most ridiculous people on the other side, and acting as if they represent everyone on the other side. And then we also emphasize nuance, not just about the people around us, but like nuance of the events of the world, right? Like the events of the world are sometimes hard to make sense of because they're complex and they don't easily fit into us versus them categories a lot of times. Um, and how if say we convince people to believe these things and think these things are important, how do we want them to spread the word to other people? Um, the primary things we want them to do, and this is kind of an order of like easy to more difficult. The lowest bar that people would do if they believe these things would be they practice de-escalating approaches when interacting with others. And this an example of this would just be like thinking more about how you interact with people online, right? Like not insulting them, just being more willing to be respectful of people like friends, family at the Thanksgiving dinner, whatever it may be, co-workers, etc. That's kind of like the bare minimum of things people would do, which is helpful in itself because it's reducing polarization and animosity. The second thing, second hardest thing to do would be spreading the word to other people about polarization ideas, which would be like, hey, these ideas are important. Go read about them and see why they're important. And I think they're important, so you should check them out. That's a little bit harder. Not a lot of people want to have those tougher conversations and be preachy about it or something. But then probably the most difficult thing, but I think is the most powerful lever of these things, is pushing back on divisive and unreasonable rhetoric or very biased takes from people on your own side, which I think is important. I emphasize people on your own side because research shows that we really can't influence people who are not politically similar to us. Like those people are just going to doubt our motives and think we are just criticizing them and have our agendas for trying to change them. But when we criticize people who are in our own group and we say we can even say things like, hey, I very much agree with you on this issue, but I think you're just adding to our divides and problems by the way you're approaching this and by the way you're insulting the other side, et cetera. So there's ways to talk to your own side in ways that are more persuasive and help them see, basically the errors of their ways. Um, and then, I think a big important part of this is like, a lot of people feel politically homeless these days, and that's what polarization does to us because more and more people feel like, hey, both sides have gone crazy, and I don't feel like I belong to either one. They kind of drop out of politics. They become politically estranged, and I think and they kind of become demoralized. I think a lot of people are just like, this sucks. Like I don't want to be a part of it. But I think a big part of the depolarization work is showing these people that kind of feel politically homeless that their skepticism and non-tribalism are valuable and even patriotic, valuable things that other people can see as valuable, and we can show them that they can play an important role in helping America, which may not be obvious to them, especially if they feel more demoralized. So it's like kind of like not weaponizing them, but putting them to good use, being like, hey, you can engage politically, and maybe you're the most important people of all because you're some of the least polarized people in the country, right? You're the least angry, or at least you're equally angry with various types of people. Uh, um, yeah, and I guess I'll kick it, and I should say too, like, I want people to be brutally honest with me because part of my my thing is like hearing people's objections, like any kind of objection. So and don't hold back because I get insulted even by my friends and family sometimes. So I can take it.
Well, I don't have a whole lot of outright objections. I have more continuations and ideas. There's not a lot that I really think you said that's innately wrong. I think for the most part, it's a pretty apt description of today's political climate. But I will go through a couple of notes.
Sure.
But first, I want to bring up that I'm sure you kind of figured this out, but it wasn't necessarily addressed inside of your presentation, that we should be expecting some amount of ideological and emotional polarization, thanks to tons of different factors that have kind of cropped up over the last several decades. I mean, fact is, if I pop open Twitter or any news application, I can see one isolated incident of something bad happening thousands of miles away, whereas 40 years ago, I would never have known anything about it, anything at all. Whether it's human rights violations in Africa or a genocide in some European country, the chances of it reaching me are they're kind of hit or miss back then, and now it's front page news all the time, and there's always some kind of spin on it, and that's because of social media. That's and I also think that some amount of polarization may actually be healthy, but obviously I think we've teetered over towards not healthy. Definitely, definitely not really what I'm interested in seeing politically right now. I think axiomatically people have formed a lot of political opinions that are the foundation of who they are over the last several years as a result of being more politically engaged thanks to social media. And while I do really love that kind of political engagement and people getting more involved, uh, it has obviously created the problem that we have now. Now, the problem is that changing anger in people is very difficult when it's things that are so near and dear to what people believe and what people hold as fundamental parts of their belief systems. And that's especially in regards to things like human rights. Take Roe v. Wade for instance. No matter where you are on that, it's pretty binary for the most part. Most people are like, obviously this should be a thing that's protected, or obviously this is a thing that's awful and bad. And there's not a whole lot of room for nuance for most people. And it's going to be a pretty big uphill battle to get people to reconsider what they think on that, or to have any kind of like idea that the ruling majority should be able to enforce their will upon the minority, regardless of who the minority or majority is. What's the next note I've got? The moralization of political ideology. I think that this is also something that was inevitable. It just, as time goes on, people are going to moralize things, especially again thanks to social media. Um, I'm not sure how inevitable it is in every issue, but some of the biggest issues that are being thrust into the political forefront or right into our faces every day are the ones that are the most maybe not inherently moral, but the ones that tend to get moralized the most. I don't actually know how I would get most people to stop moralizing some of these ideas. Do you have any like great like argument there? I'm not entirely sure, honestly. It's very difficult.
No, and I've agreed with everything you've said. Like, yeah, it's I think and I should say too, like if it's interesting, I am, I'm pretty pessimistic. It's not like I think that I or anyone is going to really there's a reason these things are so hard to turn back, right? Once they get kicked off. So I'm pretty pessimistic. It's almost like I just want to say I gave it a try, and I almost view like it's not like I think I'm going to solve it, or any specific people are going to solve it. It's more like the more people talk about it, so I can just be like one little person of all the people talking about it, right? And if more people talk about it, that's cool. But yeah, to your question of like, yeah, I do think like it gets back to that thing I said about like I don't I I try to emphasize to people like you can believe any political, you can be have any political belief, and still even a very even political beliefs many people would consider extreme, and still believe in the tenets of taking de-escalation approaches and such. So I think it's, to me it's about like not erasing people's moralization, or their passionate beliefs, or changing their beliefs. It's just about trying to make them see that like the enemy of polarization is a worse enemy than the other side, right? Like there, it's kind of combined, right? Because you're just going to end up fighting a much worse version of the other side, if things continue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah,
No,
it's
no.
not. I think it's like you say, it's all these things are super hard, and I think we can do it without changing people's beliefs.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're spot on about polarization being a huge issue, probably bigger than most of the ones that are at hand. I mean, if you look at what people call the modern culture war, it's a farce. It's practically a joke 90% of the time. We have people talking about whether or not the M&Ms have good-looking legs. Like, come on. None of this is important. And meanwhile, these are the things people are debating about online. And that's just an example of how polarization has obviously pushed incredibly inane and pointless things into practically being moralized and considered huge talking points for no good reason. You said that our views of the other side can be very distorted, and I 100% agree with you. No, I'm not sure if this is especially relevant, but growing up, I was in a pretty extreme family with some, well, let's just say Schmeit supremacist views
What was
and
that word you said?
Schmeit supremacist
Oh,
views.
oh, oh, I see. Gotcha. Okay.
And I didn't get through that and learn differently easily. I had people who were stubborn, who wanted to educate me and be kind. And I didn't have a lot of people who were like, oh, well, it's not my job to educate you. You're the worst person ever. You're irredeemable. And now it really feels like that is just what a lot of people are saying. And
Right, right.
that sucks because there really does need to be a road back for almost anyone who has bad ideas. Like you can argue that maybe some bad things can't be taken back, but a bad idea, like you can have a bad idea instilled in you at a young age, and it just gets carried with you for most of your life. I know people, very, very smart people. We're talking people with degrees, doctors, all sorts of people who just have awful ideas about a lot of things. And that's just how people operate sometimes. You said
Oh,
something
yeah.
about, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like the and as expected, it's like the more righteous we get, the more judgmental we get. There's each side creates a barrier for the other side thinking well of them or coming to agreements because it just becomes like each side just is like I will never forgive you for XYZ or what whatever it is. And so yeah, but I agree. It's like
Yeah,
we need that path of reconciliation and more people to be like, even if I think you're horrible, I'm willing to, have you back if you change your mind. Like even that low bar,
yeah,
like
anything.
leaving that idea even open as opposed to like you are just a bad person and you are fundamentally bad. Yeah.
Yeah, like whenever somebody goes viral and then someone digs into a tweet that they made like 12 years ago that one person saw then and now suddenly they're the worst human being ever because they said something stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm waiting for my tweets to come out. When are people going to do that to me? Because I've been around for a while.
every time something like that happens, I tell every person that I know that gets angry about it, if you had to be held to task for every stupid thing that you said 10 to 15 years ago, that you wouldn't be alive. Like it wouldn't happen. It's just not how people should exist. It's not good. And
Um,
whenever somebody says something extremely stupid in the modern day, and it feels like they're ideologically opposed to you in a very, very bad way, I like to think how they got to that opinion, what factors led them there. And that really helps me decide whether or not they're a person worth engaging with. And honestly, sometimes the answer's no. And if the answer is no, I just don't engage with them. If I can
right.
help it,
Yeah.
sometimes I'm a little weak.
I think that gets to yeah, I mean, maybe getting too much in the weeds there, but getting back to that, like getting at people to take more depolarizing approaches in their everyday lives. It's like recognizing that like this will be a fruitless conversation. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, why am I going to spend my time arguing with the most polarized people on the other side as opposed to like forming more persuasive messages for the more moderate people on the other side or something. It's like
Yeah.
we spend so much of our energy focused on like the worst people on the other side as opposed to like drawing the people that are more similar to us in. Yeah.
No, completely. I think especially if you're in like any kind of conversation and then like they nitpick that you said a word wrong or something, just leave the
It's
conversation.
yeah,
Just do yourself a favor. It's not
exactly.
productive.
Yeah, it's like
Or if you're like disagreeing over what words literally mean, like you're not talking on the same wavelength of that as
Why
that
even
person.
bother?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
I don't, how many millions of hours are we wasting every day on this stuff, you know?
too many. Emphasizing nuance is another note that I have. I think a lot of the time this is a very good idea, but I actually kind of already touched on how some issues just don't have nearly as much nuance as others. But obviously it's like a bit of a spectrum. Some issues are kind of black and white, some issues are a whole lot more fuzzy and just have people that really like to sit on one end or the other. Uh, Divisive rhetoric and ideological change over time. Whenever I'm in a conversation with people on my side of a given issue and they start saying things about how the people on the other side are just awful and they should all be thrown in the trash, I do try to step in and say things against it, but so very often it feels like it's just an unproductive conversation with those people. Occasionally it feels like I'm getting through, but it really does feel like for a lot of people, there's not really a good pathway towards them even changing their beliefs, which is another issue. There needs to be a pathway towards people being accepted once they do change their beliefs, but there also does need to be a pathway for people to change their beliefs in the first place. And I'm not sure if that's just a broader issue with the education system and how children are raised, if that's an issue that can be solved by kind of changing how social media is implemented and used and how information persists across it, or if it's just an issue that is so multifaceted that it's impossible to cover all of our bases.
Yeah, a couple of things there. When you talk about when it comes to trying to push back on like the most pessimistic and divisive and insulting things on our side, one way I think of that is that it's not like you're going to change the most polarized people's minds, because I think we agree on that. It's more like you're showing the arguments to like the people that are not the most polarized. You know, it's like showing them why these things aren't good. And I think not doing it in a disrespectful way, obviously, but putting it in the context of like the reason this is bad is that you're helping the other side become stronger with all your insults, right? It's like if you care about these things, you should see it through the lens of like you're basically just building the other side up. Like I think Jonathan Haidt said some quote, or it was Jonathan Haidt, he had some quote recently where it was like culture wars, and he, I think, you know, basically you could say us versus them, polarization. It's not like a regular war where you attack the other side and you defeat them. It's like you're making them stronger with all of these attacks, you know, in the sense that these attacks are like insulting and building anger. um oh, and I was going to say too, oh, you said something after that. Oh, social media. Yeah, because you had touched on social media, and I don't know if you ever saw this thing I sometimes share. It was a piece I wrote about like the inherently divisive aspects of internet communication, which a lot of people focus on like the product choices, but I wrote a piece about like the fundamental aspect of internet communication, like it being distant. You know, it having these various qualities, kind of like a medium is the message thing. It brings out the worst in us, and I think and also one factor I talked about was the internet age. Like you were saying, it makes us aware of so much, and that by a lot it in itself is like agitation producing. Like we're just aware of all these insults to our group or like bad things happening in a way that we would never have been before, and that just all that stuff just adds to our animosity. So I think it's almost like a amphetamine on of polarization, which would help explain why like most of the countries in the world have been measured to become more polarized in the last 15 years or so. But yeah, I think you were hitting on a very good point that I don't often hear people talk about, is like just the awareness of so many things, you know.
It feels like a lot. I mean, honestly, that's why I think that more and more reports are coming out showing that kids seem to be more anxious than ever. And why wouldn't they? They have tons of reasons to be anxious. The
Right.
world is a gigantic, scary place. If they make one mistake online, that could haunt them for the rest of their lives. Like if some like teenage girl accidentally gets her nudes leaked, that's her whole like life possibly that could be chasing her down. If some like kid says something stupid at a party and like thinks he's funny and says a racial slur, that could ruin his chances for college. And
Hmm.
these are just children doing stupid things. And
Hmm.
children do a lot of stupid things.
Hmm.
And I think the internet has definitely enabled them to have a much bigger audience than they ever would have. And that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's stressful for me. Like I don't, it's like I can't even imagine being a kid these days, like, and all the things they have to think about, and they see, with all this greater awareness, they see what their friends are doing, or their classmates. They're like, they're hanging out without me, and now I feel more depressed. It's like I would hate to have known that when I was a kid. All that stuff, I would have been like, I already had so many bad ideas in my mind about where my place in the hierarchy, and but to know it, is another thing.
Have you seen those like a pop-out safe rooms that in classrooms? It's basically like a panel against the wall, but you fold it out and it's bullet resistant.
Oh wow, no, I haven't
Yeah,
seen that.
it's pretty grim, but like imagine being a kid and that gets installed inside of your classroom. Every day you're going to walk in, you're going to see that, and you're going to think, "Am I going to have to use that today?"
Yeah.
That's
it's
horrifying.
it's a lot. It's so much to think about these days. It's just
Yeah.
so much awareness. Yeah.
And on the opposite end of awareness, we have political apathy and homelessness, which is my last note. You mentioned politically homeless people and what tends to happen to them. And I do think that generally most people can kind of agree that there's a specific like demographic of people within a certain age range, I mean, that tend to not really have too many political stakes because they're just not affected by a lot of the political decisions. Like right now, the biggest political decisions that we have are centering women, some aspects of our education, and things like that. So we got fathers are invested, we got women are invested, but like single men, relatively youngish single men, which are a huge demographic, they might not have as big of a political home as people tend to think because they just don't really have a reason to. Like, I have a lot of reasons to be invested politically in a lot of issues, and I'm not sure how much you've got going on in your life, but I'm sure you do as well. But what happens to these politically homeless people, I think, is that for better or worse, they do tend to just go with what is the most comfortable for them. And often that's the people that are most willing to accept them. So whether or not you agree with them is one thing, but you cannot disagree with the fact that they're going towards the people who uh, admonish them the least very, very
Mhm.
often.
Right.
And that goes back to, a pathway towards believing one thing instead of another and being accepted for believing a different thing when previously you had a bad idea. A lot of people tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to all sorts of groups of people that just have a default position based on the fact that they are in an in group that has some overlap with the political ideology.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of makes me think of like the Trump voters, who a lot of, I think a good percentage of those people were just like, the amount of thinking was basically like for a normal election where they were like, I vote for the Republican, like I'm voting against Hillary Clinton. Like it wasn't like they were, endorsing everything about Trump. It was more like, well, I vote for Republicans. That's what I do. And then to be told by liberals, like, you are a horrible person for voting for Trump. They're just like, I just, I just did what I normally do, like, why
Yeah.
is it, and I think that's a bigger factor than, because we tend to like look for all these like, oh, the other side by having these beliefs or these votes ascribes to all these things that we imagine. And it's like, no, for a lot of people, they were just like voting against Hillary Clinton because they'd heard, you know, bad information about it for 20 years now, or whatever, whatever it is,
Yeah. Like your average like 32-year-old pipe fitter doesn't care whether or not trans people are using the restroom. They might not even especially care about Roe v. Wade. Maybe they care a little bit about taxes if they're in a certain tax bracket, but like they have a lot of stuff going on. They're busy people. I know people that work like 60 to 70-hour work weeks regularly. Some even more than that, especially if they're doing construction style jobs. But a lot of these people, they don't have a dog in the race.
Mhm.
And so the people that they hang out with that do have dogs in the race, uh, they, they they might have those ideologies bleed into who they are a little bit. And then they're just getting thrown into this sea of insults and savagery that is the political space online, where they express an opinion that they might have thought about for a total of 5 minutes, and people are acting like their entire life has boiled down to this moment, and now they are irredeemable monsters.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned pipe fitting because one of my close friends from high school, um, I hung out with him a few years ago in DC. He's a steam fitter, and I found out that he was like a pretty adamant Trump supporter, which I didn't know because hadn't hung out with him for a while, and it was an interesting conversation because I was asking about like he's like Zach, I voted for Obama twice, and he's like because I'm a big union person, and then our union switched to Trump, et cetera, et cetera. So he had these reasons, and he also said like I get, and I was like, well, where do you get your opinions from? And he's like, well, mostly my political stuff comes from Facebook, just people I know sharing random stuff. And it's like,
Yeah,
I strongly disagree with his views, but it's like, yeah, I think we're on the same page. So, yeah, it's like
yeah,
things are
that's
sometimes a lot simpler and have fewer factors involved than we tend to think. Yeah.
yeah. Well, those are all the notes that I've got. I dig the presentation. I don't really have any great ideas on how to improve it. It feels like you cover a lot of ground, and I think that anyone that's actually willing to listen to it will hopefully come out the other side at least a little bit more considerate towards some of the points that you made.
Well, this is great. I thought you had some great points, and I appreciate you listening to it. And it's good to know that like even that you didn't like majorly object because I've been trying to do this for a few people from across the political spectrum, and so yeah, it's good to get people's thoughts on it. So I guess I'll just ask you some questions. What did you think of the summary of like those in order as like trying to persuade people of the problem and such?
No, I think you lay it out nice, and I think I think the order is well. I think the order is proper. The way that you ran through it,
Nice.
because even if you're skeptical in the beginning, I think you can start to see that hey, there's some real honesty here. That's what kind of comes through to me is it's not like someone's trying to someone's a swindler or they're trying to sell you something. That's what people think, or trying to change your mind. I mean, that's the big one, and that's what you're going to have to deal with. Is people okay? Honestly, when someone writes an article and I read it, the first thing I think is, why did this person choose to write this article?
Right. What's their angle?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's their angle? Yeah.
So okay, so that's what they're going to think about you when you do this presentation. So that's the first thing that you need to kind of defuse with them is the fact that hey, I'm not here to try to pick your pocket or change your idea or tell you to join my political party. I just want you to take part of something like if we all join together, we can figure out a solution. But everybody's separated in their silos. It's not going to happen. And so I think that this is and I'm from that era, so this really resonates with me. And I think that other conservative leaning or libertarian type people who are from this era would also feel this a sense of John Lennon or Bob Marley, a sense of one love. And so, yeah, so once you get over that initial hurdle of, all right, what are you trying to sell me? Are you trying to get me to change political sides? Are you trying to preach some rhetoric to me, or what is it? Then they realize that no, there's just some real truth here. There's just some honest to goodness value, societal value, human kindness, really, is what it boils down to. Because, and I say this all the time, and I know again I might just be living in my own bubble, but I remember being in the 80s in Berkeley Park, and people would have arguments, but they'd hug each other afterwards. Maybe the dude's really angry and red in the face when he walks away, but he'll shake your hand. won't spit on. I didn't see people spitting on each other or throwing objects at each other till, you know, maybe after 2000. You know, people seem to get angry. So it's like you said, there's this negative feedback loop, right? And so you start out here, but the negative feedback loop does this, right? And this pulling everyone apart. So at the end of the day, what you're doing though is going to be absolutely extremely difficult because you're going against the grain. It's so easy to go. It's so easy to go, oh my God, Trump's a piece of shit. Oh, click. Oh my God, Nancy Pelosi's an old fucking bag of bones. Click. Oh my God, right? It's easier to sell that.
Yeah, path of least resistance. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier to sell that than, hey, let's have a great day today and give someone a hug, smile at somebody. You know, oh gosh, you know. So, but that's no, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
It's path of least resistance. It's the shortcut. So and this is the problem. Okay, this is the problem. If I'm on Twitter and I'm trying to gain a following, and I see this all the time, someone way over here, someone over here. Oh my gosh, this person's horrible. Let me make this very hyperbole comment. And then everybody jumps on it, right? And then the same happens with the other side. So you and I both know, you see it on both sides. And the funny thing is, one side thinks, well, my side would never do that. Well, you just did it. So, you know, and that's the thing that I always try to tell people. And this is, I think, something, I don't know if it's valuable or not, but I always say, whatever you think that the other side has done, your side's done the same thing. So don't, you know, so maybe not be so harsh on judging them. And I think the big question is, okay, some people are going to want to play nice and go, hey, this is great. This is fun. But I think you're always going to have these people that are just going to want to cling to this ball of anger no matter what. And I don't know how to reach those people.
Yeah. And I think we don't necessarily need to. It's more about like reaching as many. And I think a lot of people are receptive to these ideas. It's just trying to reach as many or convince as many as we can. Because yeah, you're right. I mean, there's definitely people that will never convince they have too much anger to let these things go. Oh, let me ask you something. Something I often wonder. It sometimes strikes me that conservatives are more willing to admit that there are people on their side that rile up anger than liberals are willing to admit it. And I wanted to get your take on that, because sometimes it feels like it's there's some factor there of like, you know, even though people have written entire books about like liberal contributions to our divides, like by liberal people, they're, you know, I think a lot of liberals are kind of blind to the amount of like insults and condescension aimed at conservatives. And I think they're kind of blind to it because the liberal viewpoint dominates, you know, culture so much, like in academia and media, entertainment, news. So I think a lot of liberals are just kind of blind to the water that they swim in, you know. And I'm curious what you think of that. Do you think, do you feel that that's right, that like if you talk to an average conservative, they'd be more willing to be like, hey, yeah, like Trump has riled people up and you know, been a bit of gasoline on the fire, you know, versus being more willing to do that than liberals are. Do you think there's some truth to that?
Yeah, I do. I think that there's only truth to it, because I'll give you a specific example. We were watching a movie, and the movie was about reporters, and the liberal reporters were cast as this very beautiful, positive light. But then when they showed the conservatives, they were angry and trying to get in fights. So I think that what it is I think that that's almost like, you know, we talked about earlier, sometimes this misconception about the South's a bunch of hillbillies in overalls, right? I think this perception is conservatives, they're pissed off and they just want to get in a fight. And, you know, and this is also the thing, and there's even an episode on South Park where, you know, it's good to have people who are angry and they want to go to war. And it's also good to have people who are soft and they want to protest, because it shows that we care. So you kind of need all these different personalities. So I think what the conservatives feel like is they've been cast in that light as the angry person. So I think that they feel like, one thing I can do is let a liberal know that, you know, there's a heart inside of me. You know, I'm not the Tin Man, right? And I think the liberal blindness comes from the fact that people from my era, and again, this is just, I can speak to this, is We were the peace, love, and happiness people. The liberals were for so long. They were anti-war. It was peace and give me a hug and how you feel and how, you know, and positive sunshine, you know. And then at some point, and maybe it's again my perception, but at some point now it seems like both parties are just, you know, corporate sellout war pigs, in my opinion. And again, it's just my opinion, but it just seems like they're both equally. It used to be that you knew that, you know, that you knew that Dick Cheney was a warmonger. You knew it. You knew that the GOP was into starting wars, and that the Democrats were, no, we shouldn't start wars. Well, at some point, in my opinion, that switched to where now they're both sides are for war, right? And I think that the Democrats still think, the liberals still think that they're the kinder, softer people. Because they have the history of being the kinder, softer people in the 60s, changing the world, creating all this beautiful art, you know, writing all this beautiful music, right? I think that they have the perception we're the softer people. So when the other side is dehumanized, when you call them names and dehumanize them, it's easier to hurt them. And you don't think you're being as hurtful because you think, I'm this soft, kind person that comes from the caring party, you know, and he's the angry guy from the angry party, and the angry guy says, okay, maybe I am the angry guy, but I'm angry because I'm angry because things aren't right in America, damn it, and I want to change them. So then people will justify their anger. You've seen this, right? Where people justify their anger because of their political stance. So I don't know if any of that anger is, if that's what they're doing, they're justifying their anger from their political stance. But I think that the overall perception is that conservatives are angry people and liberals are supposed to be peaceful people.
And it's more complex than that.
Right. Yeah. It's not always as simple, right?
When it came to the ideas in that slideshow, do you think it's possible? Because one of the ideas that I say is it's possible to believe all those things that I put in that presentation while having, you know, a wide range of political beliefs, right? And do you think I'm right on that? Like, do you think, like, if I sat down with you, say a more far right person, a far left person, you know, my stance is that we could all agree on those conflict resolution ideas that I went through.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true?
I think it is 100% true. There was nothing partisan in there at all. There, you could have the most extreme. You could have Nick Fuentes over here, and you could have I don't know his counterpart on the left. I'm sure if I thought long enough, I'd think of one, right? And you could have the both of them extreme people, and they both couldn't really pick any bones out of what you said because the whole presentation was completely nonpartisan. I never once saw any leaning either way. I didn't see it leaning either way. So it really, really should have, no matter who you show it to, it's gonna be a video. They're gonna see what they want to see, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I think that people, you know, I guess it gets into like how we were saying, there's going to be some people that don't agree with it because they're just too full of anger. But I think that's the thing, though. I think even those people theoretically could agree with it because even if they had a lot of anger and even if they had some really extreme beliefs, like, you know, say they were like, you know, we need to defeat the other side entirely. Like, you could even believe that and take those approaches because you believe those are the best approaches to defeat the other side, right? It's like, I think that it aligns in the sense that it's like, not only are the conflict resolution ideas in my mind, they're also just the best way to actually get your, you know, get your policies passed. Because I mean, the thing that nobody ever talks about is like, we only need to convince like a few percentage people on the other side to vote for us to win elections, right? It's like, why do we take such angry stances when we could persuade a small percentage of people to, you know, we could make our message slightly more persuasive and then like decisively win an election. So it kind of, I don't know how you feel about that. Is it surprising to you that more people don't take like persuasive, you know, try to speak to the other side more, basically?
I think that there's, you know, you had mentioned the guy, and I heard him before, and I've read about him a few times. The black guy who talks to white supremacists.
Yeah, Daryl Davis. Yeah,
Daryl Davis.
yeah, yeah.
So there's examples of people like that in all walks of life, really, and that are brave and that kind of don't that realize that what people really their deep-seated anger really kind of isn't a lot of times what they say it is. You know what I mean? You ever heard the Who song "Eminence Front"? It's Eminence Front. It's put on. Sometimes people just put it on the face,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes when you dig below it, that's not really what they're angry about. It's
Right. It's more emotional stuff underneath or something.
right,
Right.
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 So, but yeah,
I mean, are you frustrated with a lot of politicians that are you like, why can't they be more persuasive and respectful and stuff like that?
well, I have a huge distrust for a lot of people in those roles.
Like politicians in general,
Right.
kind of
Now,
thing.
I honestly love Jimmy Carter. I love Jimmy so many different ways because not only was I was 10 years old when he was in office, but the fact that what he's done post office, right, since he got out, right? You see him, he's 90 years old, he's swinging a hammer on a Habitat home, right? He's just a good guy, didn't start any wars, you know. And so I look and I think that, and again, I'm just such an anti-war person, so maybe that's just me and that's my hang up, right? But it's so important to me that that our leaders are not focused on wars, right? And so when I see the people that are in charge right now, I have a hard time with all of them. And so I'd honestly say that do I really like anybody in Congress? Maybe two or three people, and even then I know. And like I told you, I like Tulsi Gabbard a lot, right? But what would happen is, if she was president, she'd turn into a piece of shit, just like the rest of them, in my opinion. So
Right. So you have really low. I think that's what a lot of people miss about. I think that's what, like, for example, like a lot of liberal people don't get about a lot of conservative people. It's not that conservative people like necessarily love Trump or love a specific politician. It's more like they have such low expectations for all of them that
right.
like all it takes is like a slight uptick in one side to vote for them. Like I think that's what a lot of people miss in general. It's like it's not that everybody's like endorsing fully the candidates they vote for. It's like
Well, when you look at the people that they put up there, it's literally like a South Park episode. You got a douche and a shit sandwich, and you got to pick between the two. And you're at the end of the day, you're like, well, how did Trump win? Well, he ran against Hillary. I mean, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, who knows? Maybe there was Russian interference. I don't know. Maybe the powers that be wanted to create more of a schism in the country.
Or maybe it was just the perfect storm in the sense that like no matter how you slice it, like Hillary had decades of, even if you don't believe it or if you believe it, she had decades of people, creating bad press about her and saying bad things about her. So she had
100%.
Lots of baggage. So, and no matter how you slice it, it was kind of like a perfect storm of some sort. Yeah.
Well, but what I'm getting at is we don't always have these, and this is the funniest thing, and I always kind of get on him about this, and I know maybe I'm not a good conservative, but I don't like Reagan that much, and they always like, oh, Reagan, like he was some sort of saint, and I have a real problem with it because started wars, sold guns, and then went in dementia the last 4 years of his presidency, and just someone else was pulling the strings. In my opinion, the guy's kind of lost it, and everyone on the conservatives like, oh, he was such a great president. Well, actually, Nixon was better. He pulled us out of Vietnam. So how do you judge? How do you judge this guy and that guy? In my opinion, though, they haven't really given us a lot of quality people. Maybe, I don't know. I always think Kennedy was a good guy, but he was shot 2 years before I was born. So, my mom was just held him on a pedestal, and maybe your parents did too, right? So, I mean, are there good? Can a good person be president? Can a good person be a billionaire? I think these are questions that are tough to answer.
let me you don't have to answer this, we don't have to get into it, but I think one thing that it would occur to a lot of people, and I wonder sometimes, it's like, um you and other conservatives I talk to seem, strike me as reasonable people with rational beliefs, and I'm curious, like a lot of people to wonder, with Trump, denying the election, and I get that, you can have some doubts and some suspicions about the election, but I guess beyond, actually, from a higher level than that, uh how do you justify, like, Trump taking such high animosity and high conflict approaches, like, for, because you could imagine somebody like Trump having the same beliefs, but taking a much more, conflict resolution or calmer approach to things, and I'm curious, like, would you prefer that? Like, would you like to see that? Do you think that'd be a better approach he would take that would help the country more?
I think that when you look at the debate between him and Hillary, and they're just calling each other names back and forth, and it's just nasty. I think that's what politics is now, unfortunately. And unfortunately, that's what people like, because they vote for it. And it's just horrible. And I really think that he plays into that. He looks for those phrases or those ways to really, you know, um, so what was the company in what was the company in the UK that had all that information that helped Obama get elected, then they helped Trump get elected? Cambridge.
The Cambridge
Cambridge
Analytica.
Analytica.
Yeah.
I think he's a real guy that really likes those stats, and he studies them. And if it says build the wall, and if they tell him that's what you need to say, right? I think he's like, oh, this is going to get me more followers. So I've had this conversation with you before, where the guy has a really big ego, right? And it would be so much easier if he just dropped the ego and just was nicer instead of prickly, right? Prickly. Now he justifies his prickliness because people say shitty things to him, or reporters are mean to him, so he thinks he has a right to be snarky back, right? Well, it would be nice if he was more like Gandhi, or someone that was peaceful, and said, let me show you the way, let me show you how to be, how to treat people. But I think he gets really wound up in that cycle of, oh, you said this about me, I must say that about you. And then people are, yeah, he said that. And then, and how people are, oh, did you see her tweet? It's like, oh gosh, people. And I think that negative feedback loop that you're talking about, right, where negative things get said, and I think that we have that so much on both sides, and I think that he realizes that that's something that he can tap into. I do wish that he had nicer mannerisms and wasn't as misogynistic, and was treated people a little bit better. But I don't know if you're going to find very many people that are multimillionaires or billionaires that are nice people. Do you know many?
And I think that's I mean, to take the conservative point of view, to kind of channel it, I think that's what a lot of conservatives believe, is like that Trump is justified due to all the transgressions that
Correct.
we see on the left. Correct. So they can excuse it, at least. It's not like,
that's correct.
I don't think necessarily a lot of conservatives are like enthusiastic about Trump's approach, but I think a lot of them make peace with it, because they're like, like, for example, like, it's pretty clear that there were a lot of bad, exaggerated Trump Russia pieces and things like this that were just, in my opinion, after reading, like, for example, Glenn Greenwald's dissection of the really irresponsible and exaggerated stories, you can read those kinds of things and start to get a sense of what drives Trump's anger and what drives conservatives' anger, and I think a lot of liberals just do not see that angle of things.
Right. No, that's exactly it. It's like, oh, you did these horrible things to us, so we're justified to lash out in anger, right? And then it becomes a cheering section, right? It's like, I don't know, there's the Greta Thunberg or something was having some Twitter fight with somebody and they're all cheering each other on for saying mean things to each other. It's like, well, how's that doing anything good? How's that saving the environment? You know, you guys are yelling at each other, calling each other names on Twitter, saying mean things to each other. And it's like, come on now.
Yeah, I'm with you, because it's so often I'm just like, I mean, I turn the other cheek all the time. Like, people are constantly insulting me, and I'm just like, I don't have to respond to them. This nobody's forcing me to like respond to these people. I just, but the impulse is to like, I gotta fight back. I gotta fight back with some insults.
I think that the thing that happens, right, is like, and it works on both sides. So I'm not just picking on the liberals here, but like what happens is it's like, okay, so Trump wins, and then all of a sudden there's all this anger, and then it's stoked by the media, right? So then that kind of creates this dark cloud already, right? Where everybody's already pissed off, and he's not my president, and resist, and all this stuff. And it's like, oh my gosh, right? And so then I think now then what happens is now the other side says, oh, look what they did. So now we get to do this, right? And I think people have always felt that way, like, well, you did this to me, so I can do this to you. And I'm telling you, if it was an eye for an eye, we'd all be blind, right? I mean,
yeah, we might end up blind. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing about depolarization and what you're doing is it goes against the natural thing. Like if a dog bit you, you'd be pissed off and you want to slap it. Well, you can't. It's a dog. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. Like someone reaches out and you says, "Oh, you horrible liberal! You did this horrible thing." You know what I mean? It's your fault that Trump's in office because you liberals, blah blah blah, dot dot dot. Right? So your natural reaction is to reach out and get your claws out, right? Well, how do we stop people from getting their claws out and getting to want to put their claws back in and go, hey, let me show you how to treat somebody. So someone says to you, oh, you're a horrible liberal, you did this and this. So, okay, let me show you how this conversation should have gone.
Yeah, so, I think can you think of because I think another thing that's kind of less obvious to liberal people is how the kind of the insulting things that even some influential, like Biden, for example. Like I'll take an example. Like I think he's not nearly at the level Trump is with insulting language, but he's still said things that I found like not just amplifying divides, like basically in some speeches where he would refer to MAGA Republicans as like it was a slur, like as if it was like that was as if he was painting all of so-called Trump supporters, basically MAGA Republicans, with this brush that was like the most extreme conservative, like the January 6th storming of the Capitol kind of Republican, but like that blurring that, painting that other group as like all as bad as the worst people is like what that's amplifying the divides. And like I see people doing that all the time, and I don't think it's obvious to a lot of people because it's on the more subtler side. Like it's not like he's like saying you scumbags, but it's right. Like by painting everyone with the same brush. I think it's
so and I'm old enough to remember this, and during the Ford Nixon era, right? All those people that were in Nixon's cabinet stayed in his cabinet when Ford came, and then they stayed in the cabinet when Carter came. It wasn't a situation then where people were so polarized and said, oh, I hate this president, I don't want to be in this cabinet. It was, I hate this guy, but you know what? I'm serving my country. And you left these people in these positions. You changed a few people, and so now we have where you've got to go in, you got to change everybody, right? When you're a president, you got to fill all these positions, because if you don't, there's going to be backstabbers and people who hate you. And to me, this is the problem, right? Is you have all this partisanship where it's like, well, you work in the White House, okay, you worked in the Clinton era, and then Bush comes in. So what? So, keep your job. You don't have to be so angry that the person in is not your person, that you need to be replaced. And I think we're seeing this now more in politics than we saw 20, 30 years ago. And,
sure.
And I think that makes it difficult, right, for these these folks that are, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in 2024, but let's say, you know, someone new comes into office, they have to fill all these cabinet positions, and it seems like a lot of work. And
yeah, a lot of dysfunction when they have to cycle through everybody again, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, but this has been great.
Thanks for watching. I'm Zachary Elwood, and if you're interested in learning more about my work, I have a psychology podcast called People Who Read People, which you can find at behavior-podcast.com. And again, if you found this video important and helpful, please consider sharing it with other people. Part of the problem of reducing our us versus them divides is simply more people talking about these things and sharing the ideas with other people. Thanks for watching.